watching Roll Tide Daily, the new daily program for Crimson Tide fans, presented by SEC Country. Now, here's your host, former Alabama All-American, Mike Johnson.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back in Roll Tide Daily. I'm your host, Mike Johnson. I promised you guys we'd be back here Tuesday after a wonderful Memorial Day. Hope you guys all enjoyed some better weather than we did here in Atlanta. I know there's a bunch of storms hitting the Gulf Coast. A lot of Alabama fans living down there right now. Hope you guys are staying safe. But we had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Back here for my favorite 30 minutes of the day, and that's for Roll Tide Daily. Like I said off the top, my name is Mike Johnson. I was blessed enough to at one point put on the Crimson Tide uniform and strap up under Nick Saban back in 2009. And now I'm blessed enough to bring you the best 30 minutes of your day and my day sitting here on the SEC Country Alabama Facebook page on YouTube. Hope you guys will all chime in. We have a ton of stuff in store today in terms of the show. We got Mark Burnett going to join us a little bit later in the show, going to answer some of your questions. We're going to talk a little bit about Tua and a little bit of video evidence that this quarterback competition is kicking off, because today's May 29th, it's the start of Summer Session 1 over at Alabama and Tuscaloosa. A lot of these players just now showing up. A lot of these players getting ready to get decruited under Scott Cochran, so it should be quite an eventful next couple of weeks in terms of what's going on in Alabama football, and we will keep you up to date on the latest. First of all, off the top, I just want to talk about my shirt. I've gotten a lot of questions about my shirt. Before we get to topic number one, this says Old Colony. If any of you guys know what Old Colony is, it's the home of Alabama men's golf and Alabama women's golf over in Tuscaloosa. Alabama men's golf, about 30 minutes ago, sank a putt in the fifth match of the day. They're going to go on to the semifinals. I'm not sure who they're playing just yet, but they beat Texas Tech in the quarterfinals in the NCAA golf championships. They're going to move on to the next round in that tournament. So that's a lot of fun. A lot of people following along with that. I'm wearing my Old Colony shirt today to make sure I represent that golf team and make sure everybody's following along and giving a bunch of roll tides to those guys over there at the NCAA championships. But without further ado, we're going to move on to topic number one. We're going to talk a little bit about the quarterback competition. We're going to talk about Tua Tagovailoa and a video that was tweeted out over the weekend that got a lot of Alabama fans, myself included, really excited about what's coming up in the quarterback race with Jalen Hurts, this competition that's set to kick off. Here it is right here, courtesy of Sports Recruit on Twitter. It's just a small video now. We're talking about 7 seconds here, 10 seconds. But what you're seeing is Tua Tagovailoa, a guy who didn't play in the 8A game, a guy who got a limited number of snaps throughout the spring. You didn't see him during the 8A game, but you saw Jalen Hurts, you saw Mack Wilson. But this is Tua. This is Tua spinning the ball. This is left-handed Tua moving around the pocket. You can just see Devontae Smith on the other end of that ball. I'm having flashbacks right now. I think this is beautiful news for all Alabama fans because, like I said, today's May 29th. Today's the first day of summer session number 1 over in Tuscaloosa. Everybody's showing back up to campus. We talked a lot last week about Tua Tagovailoa. We talked about how he was over in Hawaii, doing Tua Tagovailoa Day, getting through all the parades, making sure he's having a ton of fun. Brought some of his friends with him from the team. We saw a bunch of videos through that, but to see him kind of throwing, and this is a quarterback showcase I think his brother was involved in, but to see him spin a football like that, I think gets everybody pretty excited right now in terms of what we have going on, because the quarterback competition is starting right now. I mean, we can talk about the spring all we want to. Tua didn't play much, didn't have a ton of snaps, had an injured thumb. But this is when the quarterback competition kicks off. This is when you get the pass skill, right? This is when the linemen move off to the side. This is when they're punching backs, punching medicine balls, making sure they're getting their bench press in. They move over to the side, and then all of a sudden Tua and Jalen are doing 7-on-7. That's when you got Henry Ruggs. That's when you got, hopefully, Jerry Jeudy at some point this summer. That's when you have Irv Smith or Kedrick James coming out of the backfield, those tight end spots, the 7-on-7, the pass skill. That's when this kicks in. A lot of people don't think this is a big time in Alabama football, but I'm telling you, I've shown up. You get the 26 110s on day one. Everybody's breathing heavy. You're throwing Terrence Cody's 40-pound arm over your back and making sure he's getting up and down the field. A lot of people kind of chiming in the comment section. Andre Harris says Jalen will win this easy. Interesting. We don't hear a lot of people that are really on Jalen's side in terms of that. I got to be honest with you. In terms of the comment section, it's been about at least 80-20 in favor of Tua Tagovailoa. A lot of people kind of wanting to move to a more pass-heavy offense under him and thinking he's going to be the one of the future. Tyler McFarland weighing in said #move Jalen to running back. I don't know that that's the key. I think that Jalen could do a lot of different things in that offense. I don't know that running back is the key. I mean, you got to think the running back may be the only position on this football team that's more loaded than the quarterback position right now. So moving to running back is not that easy of a way to get on the field. Justin Delmarco weighs in and asks, how much throwing is he actually doing in June anyways? Feels like it wouldn't be much regardless if he's healthy or not. I think he's doing a lot. I think this is a 3-day-a-week kind of thing. I think this is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, probably Pascal 7-on-7 for a lot of these guys. You got to think that Tua and Jalen are both organizing these activities because coaches can't be a part of this. This is a Scott Cochran running you, and then afterwards you're going to go out and get some work with your wide receivers, Jalen Hurts, Tua, Mac Jones, and a guy we're going to talk about in a little bit, Lane Hatcher, probably being a big part of those 7-on-7s. But this is where it starts, right? This is where, hey, you know what? You need to take one extra step on that route before you come back at me. I think that's what's so excited about this time as far as Alabama football goes. Dean Mitchell weighing in. What's up, Mike, inside the Crimson Tide? Kevin Wardlaw says yes. Coy Mitchell weighing in says Tua. Kevin Wardlaw says start the Hawaiian. A lot of people feeling that way. Like I said, I think it's about 80-20 right now in terms of comments I see for people that want to see Tua start the year at quarterback. Now, I will invite you guys to weigh in the comment section. We're also over on YouTube. If you search Roll Tide Daily or SEC Country Alabama, we're over there. I'm keeping up with that comment section as well. And I want to invite you guys to share the show. It's a big part of what we do. If you like what we're doing, you like talking about Alabama football every day at 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central, please go out and share the show for us to make sure we get as many people possible on board and talking about some of the things that we love to talk about. I think it's a big deal for us to be able to get those shares and be able to talk to other Alabama fans and people that bleed crimson just like you and I do. And so I invite you to share the show, invite you to go out and talk, and we're going to talk a lot about Alabama football all summer long. Bringing to you here live on the SC Country Alabama Facebook page. Now, I do want to show you a quick video before we get to our next topic because, the scandals are the ones that get the clicks. The scandals are the ones that talk about Tua kind of wrapping up his vacation down in Hawaii back in his home state. Got to do a little bit of touring of Pearl Harbor. We're going to show you guys a little bit of that video here that came from Alabama, AL.com, I think was the people that put that together. So I thought it was a great video. You see the tweet right here. So many times do you hear about things that you cannot be proud of, but here on Memorial Day, you got Alex Leatherwood right there. Talia Tagovailoa is a part of this as well. Josh Kasher was interviewed in this piece. See these guys going over and visiting the Arizona, making sure they're paying their respects on this Memorial Day weekend. I thought it was important to show you guys some of these videos, pay their respects, make sure that you are proud of the football team that they're putting out there. I'm an ex-football player, so I think it's important to kind of show these videos like this. Like I said, the scandals get the clicks, the arrests get the clicks. The quarterback competition, the Lane Kiffin quotes get the clicks, but I wanted to make sure I showed you guys what was going on and what you could be proud of in terms of the product that Coach Saban's putting on the field and the kind of young men he's bringing into that program. But without further ado, we're going to move on from Tua right now and talk about another Alabama quarterback, a guy a lot of you people probably haven't heard of yet, Nick Saban, pulling off his magic again. He goes back into the 2018 recruiting cycle. You remember you guys way back in February, I think Alabama finished with the top 6 signing class and 247 Composite Sports, one of their lowest finishes for a while. But Nick Saban reaches back in his bag of tricks, does a little bit of that roster management, if you will, that he's become so famous for. Goes back and gets a quarterback commitment, a guy that's going to show up. I think he moved in a couple of days ago into the dormitory into Bryant Hall. This is Lane Hatcher, a quarterback who was committed to Arkansas State that Bama thought of early in the process as a guy who was going to get a preferred walk-on spot. There you see the announcement on his Twitter page. He commits to Bama, he signs with Bama, he enrolls in Bama, and he moves to Tuscaloosa all within the span of 3 days. And I think this is a big topic to talk about for a couple of different reasons. First of all, rarely do you see Bama reach back to that 2018 recruiting cycle, reach back 3 months and go and get a guy during the summer that they think can help out the football team this year. But I think this tells you a lot. And I know a lot of people aren't going to be willing to hear this and want to talk about this. I think this tells you that Nick Saban's preparing to lose one of his quarterbacks that he's already got on the roster. I think if you were comfortable with the 3 guys you had there and comfortable with the fact that these guys would all be on the roster, I think it's exciting that you're going to bring in another guy. But I got to be tell you the truth. To read between the lines here, I think Nick Saban's not comfortable with the numbers he has right now in the quarterback room. I think he wanted to make sure they added a guy in this class. Like I said, he had a preferred walk-on spot. You're going to hear another name, Braxton Barker, who is Jay Barker's son, who also has a preferred walk-on spot and is headed down to Tuscaloosa this weekend to enroll as well. But I think one of those things to really look at here is the fact that bringing in a guy like Lane Hatcher, whose offers include the juggernauts, Arkansas State, Eastern Illinois, Murray State, among his slew of offers. He was headed to Arkansas State. And, this is a guy out of Little Rock, Arkansas, Pulaski Academy. Nick Saban reaches back and says, you know what, if you're willing to come on board here and be a part of this program to help us out moving forward, we have a spot for you. And so I think that's what's so exciting. I think that bringing a guy like this on board really tells you a lot about what Nick Saban sees in the quarterback room. Robbie Harris agrees. He says, Nick knows what he's doing for sure. Trust the process. You got a lot of people talking about Nick Saban and Jalen Hurts and what really he fits into this conversation. And I think it's so exciting that Lane Hatcher is going to jump on board. Remember, they tried to get Gardner Minshew. Out of Eastern Carolina. He heads up to Washington State. So Nick Saban felt like this quarterback room was a little bit thin and wanted to make sure he added to this class. And I think we're going to try to get Mark Burnett on the phone here in just a second. Obviously, you guys have enjoyed a ton of his content on SECcountry.com. A lot of people weighing in with Roll Tides, Marion Ray Birchfield, Roll Tide. Robbie Harris, great to hear you again, Mike. I'm glad to be back on air, man. You guys know that I'm excited for this 30 minutes, excited to get this thing pumped up. We're going to get Mark Burnett on the line here in just a second. Later on, we're going to talk about a Vegas handicapper that came out and said he thinks Alabama is heavy favorites against Georgia in a possible SEC championship matchups. But for right now, we're going to welcome in my buddy Mark Burnett from SECcountry.com. Obviously, you guys have read a ton of his articles. After the news last week, we are so excited to hear from Mark Burnett and hear about what possibly is the next chapter for him. Mark, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always, and appreciate you joining the show. And we got a couple of different topics to dive into. I've always enjoyed your commentary. I've always enjoyed your angle on things. Obviously, we've done work before together, so I'm excited to see what you had to think about this. But first of all, the video we started at the top of the show with, that's Tua Tagovailoa moving around in the pocket. Now, it was a small clip, but he's out in California at quarterback camp. He's moving around in the pocket. He's I guarantee I didn't see the other end of the throw, but he's definitely throwing dimes to some of those receivers out there. How excited can Bama fans feel right now that it feels to me like the quarterback competition is finally getting cranked off, and I think that's excitement for a lot of Alabama fans.
Yeah, I definitely think, you know, if you're an Alabama fan, you should be excited about Tua showing progress and the fact that he's out there still getting work in, and also that hand is healing properly to the point where he's able to throw. But the biggest thing is you just don't want him to have a setback. I think that's probably the one thing where you're sort of holding your breath. You don't want him to have a too hard or something like that, because that is his throwing hand, and you don't want this to be a situation where it lingers or he becomes sort of quote-unquote injury-prone. But I think it's all positive right now. You know, the fact that he wasn't able to play in A-Day, that was a bit of a downer for the fan base, but at the same time, I think the fact that he's showing that, you know, he is able to throw is a good sign.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, too. And I love that you bring up that term setback, because that's something we had to hear during spring practice, something we had to hear in the lead up to A-Day game, that Tua had a setback with the thumb. So I definitely think Bama fans are wishing him the most of help and making sure that he's not stepping outside of the program, stepping outside the people that are taking care of him and just doing something reckless out in California. I think we can all hope for a lot of different reasons that Tua's making the right decisions there. But I got to ask you about another quarterback prospect. Not Tua, not Jalen this time, not even Mac Jones. We're talking about a guy like Lane Hatcher that Bama reaches back into the 2018 signing class with, is able to bring him on board, the former Arkansas State commit. I'm trying to read between the lines here, Mark, and I'm trying to wonder if this tells me something about this upcoming quarterback competition, or does it not? Or does Nick Saban just see this guy that could possibly be a big part of the quarterback rotation for the upcoming years? What did you make of all this? What did you make of him decommitting from Arkansas State to head down to Tuscaloosa and join the fray? And what does this say about how Nick Saban feels about that quarterback room?
Well, if you're him, I mean, if Alabama calls, you're decommitted from pretty much wherever you're at, right? I mean, you're getting on the plane in Tuscaloosa immediately. But yeah, I think you can read into this a couple different ways. You know, first, it could tell you that if one of these guys doesn't win the quarterback competition, you could be looking at a transfer, because I doubt either one of these guys wants to waste another year of eligibility. But at the same time, I mean, this is what I've been saying all along is Alabama only had 3 scholarship quarterbacks. So if you lose one of these guys, you're down to 2, and that would be sort of a dire situation, especially considering if it was Tua to stick around and Jalen were to leave. You know, Tua has had the hand injury. Mac Jones doesn't have much experience. So the last thing you want, and one of the things that always sort of made me scratch my head when people are so gung-ho about Jalen transferring or moving positions, it just never made sense to me, because the quarterback room is so thin already. And if a guy like Jalen were to leave, you basically have no real experience in there. So I think there are a couple of different ways to read into this. But yeah, I think Nick Saban is always going to do what's best for the program, even if that's just adding another body into the quarterback room for a different set of eyes and a different arm to just get reps in there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too, and I think that's a great sentiment to look at, because it does leave you thin if Jalen Hurts does look at other positions. or other universities to head to. Now, Mark, I do got to put you on the spot because you put out an article last week about Nick Saban's toughest losses at Alabama, and you followed up on a guy that we all know and love in Bama land. Jermaine Funnymane Johnson puts out his list. He had a couple of games on there that I was a part of that I didn't want to hear about, but your list was a little bit more friendly to the guys that played back with me from 05 to 09, obviously, and Nick Saban from 07 to 09. You put out a list that included Ohio State, Clemson, obviously Jalen Hurts being a big part of that game. But you didn't number them. You didn't number them for us, man. We didn't get a countdown. Can you tell us which one of those losses, or maybe even include one from back in my time there, which one of those losses was the toughest one for you, Mark?
Well, for me personally, I led off with that Alabama LSU 2011 game of the century. I went to Alabama, but it was pretty easy for me to sort of turn off the fandom. I was a reporter, I was a professional, but that game in particular was kind of tough to swallow because you built that game up for like 2 weeks. Everybody knew that those were the best two teams in the country. And if you go back to that game, I thought Alabama outplayed LSU, but they just couldn't convert once they got inside the 20s. And both of those defenses were incredible. I remember seeing something where both of those defenses, for every player from those defenses was in the NFL at one point. So that just shows you the amount of talent that was on both sides of that ball. 08, for you guys, I'm sure you remember this one. That Florida loss to Tim Tebow in the SEC championship game. That was a crazy one because it was one of those things where you kind of felt like, okay, Alabama is back. This feels really quick. Like, how are they able to do this? And I remember you guys smacked Georgia around and had a lot of great wins that season. And then you get to that SEC championship game, you're thinking, oh, man, is Nick Saban and Alabama really about to knock off Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow? And you guys come up just a little bit short, but obviously you ran through them that next year. So not a lot of losses to really rank. I remember that Ohio State one vividly because I remember thinking that that 2014 Alabama team kind of overachieved, in my opinion, with Blake Sims at quarterback. But I was really rooting for a guy like Blake Sims to go out on top because of what he had went through in terms of changing positions, and nobody really thinking he could be a starting quarterback, and then he comes out and has that team in the playoffs. So, like I said, not a ton of losses, but there are a few that sort of stick out. But I do remember that Ohio State one. That was the one time I remember looking at the opposing team and thinking, wow, this team has just as much, if not more, talent on both sides of the ball as Alabama does.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. And I'm glad you touched on the Florida game from 08. That was a tough loss for me, but I actually don't put it amongst the toughest ones for me. The Clemson game a couple years ago, as a fan, obviously being probably the one that I harp on the most. David Hardy weighing in the comment section says the Utah Sugar Bowl was brutal. I actually only played like 8 or 9 snaps in that game. I was taking over at left tackle for Andre Smith, who was suspended. I moved over and got rolled up by Glenn Coffey and company. So I didn't hang out for a ton in that game. Jonathan Jennings weighing in the comment section, the LSU loss game of the century only made that national championship year so much sweeter. I have to agree with you in terms of that. That made that LSU game a lot sweeter, especially being an SEC foe and an SEC West foe. Now, I do want to bring up one other point with you because, as you know, in this building that I work in, Mark, and you know my cohort, Brandon Adams, he's always talking about Georgia football and how they're moving in the right direction and how they're on the heels of Alabama right now. We heard some words out of Brian Edwards at SECcountry.com last week. Alex Martin Smith putting out an article about Brian Edwards and what he had to say about a potential matchup. He says it's at least 8.5 or 9 points. And we're going to talk about this later in the show, but I wanted to make sure I got your thought on this. 8.5 or a 9-point line. Says it's a huge loss to Nick Chubb, Roquan Smith, Sony Michel. Are you in agreement with that? Is 8.5 points, right on for you? Do you think Alabama rolls over Georgia that easily in a possible SEC championship matchup?
I mean, I think if you look at it, it's really, on paper, it's going to be hard to say that another team is as good as or better than Alabama. So, I mean, we have to obviously take into consideration the lines and how they work with Vegas. But at the same time, yeah, I do believe that. I think Alabama's bringing back a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball, ton of talent on the offensive side of the ball. I think this team is going to be very good, and I think Georgia lost a ton. Georgia kind of was in the same situation as you guys after you lost that 08 SEC championship game. How do you bounce back from such a sort of heartbreaking loss where it feels like you're right there, in the thick of things? And I don't think it's going to be easy. I mean, they lost a lot of senior leadership, a lot of playmakers, but they do have a lot of talent coming back. Kirby Smart is recruiting at a really high level, but at the same time, I mean, I don't think it's a far-fetched to say that Alabama would be a 8 or 9 point favorite over anybody in the country. I mean, I can't think of anybody who would, outside of maybe Clemson, because you look at their defense and think that they're really good on that side of the ball, but at the same time, I just can't look at anybody and say that team would beat Alabama on a neutral field.
Absolutely, and you're right. I've drawn those comparisons to 2008 Georgia. 2008 Alabama to 2017 Georgia a ton. I think they do run along the same line, so it's going to be interesting to see how Kirby Smart and company bounce back. Before I let you go, though, this is a topic I'm going to be diving in on for the show. I think I'm going to start a Damian Harris for Heisman campaign. What do you think about that? I know that a lot of these odds have come out. You've heard a lot about Tua. You've heard a lot even about Jalen Hurts. You even hear Jared Stidham there in the state of Alabama. I don't think Damian Harris is getting enough love. I think he's like 50-1, while Tua's like 9-1 right now after playing one half of football. If you had to put your money down on one of these guys, or any one of these guys from the roster, Tua, Jalen, or Damian Harris, who are you going with in that discussion?
Well, it's tough with Damian. I mean, I remember we were sort of pushing him for Heisman last year, but he just didn't get the amount of touches that you need, and I don't know if he's going to be able to get that this year. You think about what Mark Ingram had to do in the year he won Heisman with you guys, and then obviously what Derrick Henry did back in 2015. It just takes so much for a running back or a skill player that's not a quarterback to even be in consideration, because of the quarterbacks put up such big numbers. They can throw for 4,500 yards, 30, 40 touchdowns, something like that. But yeah, I definitely think Damian, should be higher on the off-season odds. But I just don't think he'll get enough carries. I think we'll see guys like Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs, if he's healthy, Brian Robinson. Those guys you'll see more of a split load, and Damian just want to get the amount of touches. But I definitely think he deserves consideration.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, too. And I think that's a big reason when you look at Bo Scarborough's decision to leave for the NFL. I think the writing was on the wall. I don't think the carries are going to be there for Bo moving forward. I think this is a Damian, Najee, Josh Jacobs sprinkled in kind of rushing attack for Alabama this year. But, Mark, as always, man, we appreciate you jumping on the show with us. You always bring a ton of Alabama knowledge. We're going to be paying attention to your future very closely here in the coming weeks, and wish you all the best, man. And thanks for coming in with us.
Hey, I appreciate it, man, and good luck to everything with you, and keep up the great work with the show.
All right, I appreciate that, Mark Burnett. That's Mark Burnett, formerly, I guess, of SECCountry.com. And obviously, after the news last week, he's headed another direction. But he is a very good writer, extremely experienced, loves Alabama football, and is always one of those guys that I think is willing to hop on and willing to give his opinion. So he's got a bright future ahead of him. A lot of people weighing in the comment section. Martha Vassar says, Tua could be the Heisman winner. Colin Vizin talking about Damian Harris. I don't think he'll get the carries. Too much depth at the position, and if Tua starts, they'll pass more than in the years past. Now, I don't know if I agree with that. I really don't. I think that everybody's focusing on the quarterback competition, and I think that Tua is very gifted. I think that Jalen's very gifted. But I think this is going to be the same old Alabama team. I think Michael Locksley is going to strap in with Dan Enos and come up with a game plan that features these running backs even more than they have in years past. I think it's going to be almost Derrick Henry-esque kind of year from 2015, where Derrick just keeps getting fed the ball. I don't know who that guy is going to be. Is it going to be Damian Harris? Is it going to be Najee Harris? Is it going to be like a guy like Josh Jacobs, or even a guy like Brian Robinson, a guy who we have not heard from very much, but I know the coaching staff is very, very high on and being one of those guys that can carry the ball and can carry the team and move forward as far as the running game goes. Now, like we touched on this when we talked to Mark Burnett a minute ago, but we're going to talk a little bit about this Alabama-Georgia conversation. I thought it was very interesting. Over the weekend, Alex Martin Smith comes out with an article on STCountry.com, and he mentions the fact that Brian Edwards, a handicapper we covered last week, a guy who gave us what he thought would be the spread for all the Alabama football games throughout the year, he comes on with Alex Martin Smith and talks to SEC Country, and he's asked about a potential matchup between Alabama and Georgia in the SEC Championship and what his thoughts on that game would be right now as things stand. And here's what he had to say as far as that goes. I think Alabama's got better talent, better depth, better coach. We all tend to agree with you. Georgia last year was much closer to Bama, but I think losing Chubb, Michelle Smith was big. They lost some other good talent to the NFL. I just think Alabama is better top to bottom. Now, I think that's interesting to hear from Brian Edwards, because I think wearing my crimson goggles, wearing my Bama glasses, talking to Alabama fans, knowing the inside of this program, knowing how good Chubb, Michelle, Roquan Smith, the reigning Dick Butkus Award winner, knowing how good they were, I think that's a fair point. And I think that it's easy to put on our crimson goggles and say, boy, Bama's going to roll over anybody they put in front of them. But to hear it come from a guy who is a Vegas handicapper, and I'll remind you that we saw the point spreads last week for a ton of games. To put that on a Vegas handicapper, to where he's pointing and saying, you know what, the love for Jake Fromm's good. I don't know if it's enough. 8.5 or 9 points is what Brian Edwards kind of forecasted to be the line in a potential Bama-Georgia matchup. Now, he did go on to say that he thinks Georgia finishes somewhere 11-1, 10-2. He said, I still think that's good enough to get the job done in the SEC East, and I think this matchup will kind of come to fruition in Georgia and Atlanta in the SEC Championship game. He's got Bama, as a reminder, going 12-0, double-digit favorites in all of them. And here's the spreads we showed you last week. Now, I think what's interesting to look at here, Look at what I just said about Georgia. 8.5 or 9-point favorite in that game, possibly against Alabama. But look at LSU. Look at LSU with an 8-point spread. This is coming from Brian Edwards as well. He gives Bama an 8-point spread going down to Baton Rouge and LSU. And then obviously Georgia would be a neutral site game at the end of the year. But tends to give LSU a little bit of that, that front-running mentality, a little bit of that, hey, you guys are going to dive in on bet on this game. 8 points being the only single-digit spread on this list, I think, is a big deal because you guys know Bama's always going to have trouble with LSU and Baton Rouge. It's never an easy game. Georgia also has to head down to Baton Rouge this year to play LSU. Athletically, LSU is always one of those teams who's going to match up. Schematically, they've always had the issues, and I think that's why you see some of these Vegas numbers coming out. 6.5 wins being the over-under for LSU this year, but it is interesting that he thinks of them as a closer football team due to the home field advantage down in Baton Rouge. More of a home field advantage, I guess, for LSU than anything, but looking at that spread, I think it's all about how these teams are going to match up. Georgia's going to be very good. I don't want to take anything from Georgia and Kirby Smart. But I think 10-2 is probably right on when you talk about what that football team's looking at with some of the losses they're going to have. Everybody continues to weigh in the comment section. I appreciate you guys hanging out. Wayne Stratton says Nick's going to run the ball. Saban not just going to start throwing 50-50 balls. I agree with that. This is not going to be a throw-up offense. This is not going to be a fade route offense. This is going to be a run-the-dang football offense behind Damian Harris and Najee Harris. David Hardy agreeing, saying we are still a run-first team. Devontae Smith and Tua, says Tanya Nolan. I don't mind that. I don't mind that. I don't mind the Tua to Devontae Smith or Tua to Henry Ruggs. But I still think this is a run the football team. I'm an offensive lineman. You guys know me. Like I said at the top of the show, my name is Mike Johnson. I used to play for the Alabama Crimson Tide, won a national title back in 2009, and now I get to hang out with you every day. So if you look at what my pass is, I always lean towards that running game, towards the offensive line play. I always think it's a special thing whenever you're able to really get that going. I think it's backbreaking for the opposing football teams. I think it's backbreaking for a team like Auburn to come into Tuscaloosa. Jared Seeger's pointing to the fact that Alabama's O-line will be very good once they gel. I completely agree with that. No, I think that they struggled in the spring. I'm not sure Lester Cotton is the guy that's going to be settling into that left guard role. We're gonna touch on that in the coming days and weeks. But I think the talent's there. I don't know what the combination is just yet, but Lester Cotton, Alex Leatherwood, Jedrick Wills, Matt Womack. I don't know exactly what combination we're going to see when they kick off against Louisville in September, but I guarantee you they're going to be a good unit once all is said and done. Now, you guys continue to weigh in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rolling with us today. And before I let you go on the show, I thought it was important because I got hyped up when I saw this, man. This thing hit Twitter yesterday. This is a guy who I think jacks up a lot of Alabama fans, and that's Mack Wilson, a guy we expect a ton from. We talked about Athlon last week. They listed Alabama's linebacking group as the number one linebacking group in the country, and a lot of it comes from the fact that Mack Wilson is such a different playmaker in terms of what he's able to bring to the field. But he released his own hype video yesterday on Twitter, and I got to tell you, after watching a little bit of it, I was ready to run through a wall. And I think you guys are going to feel the same way. Watch a little bit of this video, and then I'll chime back in here in a little bit. This is Mack Wilson's kind of highlight video or kind of hype-up video for the coming season. Take a look at this.
Love you, mama. So God. And grandmama. Damn, mama. I don't wanna say
That's Mack Wilson. He's going to be an elite player someday.
Boy, you got to love that, don't you? I mean, it continues on. It's about a 2-minute video. If you guys want to see it, that's Mack Wilson's Twitter handle right there. IMMW30 right there. I got to tell you, man, I was not big on hype videos to begin with. Now, we used to watch a hype video every Friday night in the hotel in Tuscaloosa to get hyped up for the game. The video department put something together, but I got to tell you, man, knowing what Mack Wilson brings to the field, knowing what this defense could possibly be, it sounds like a lot of you guys in the comment section absolutely agree with it. He's a headhunter, says Jared Seegers, David Hardy, Mack Truck Wilson. I got to tell you, this gets me so fired up. I'm so ready for this team to take the field against Louisville there on September 1st. I think we got, 95 days? Maybe less than that. I think it's 95 days until that open game down in Orlando. That Louisville team, I think they're in for a rude awakening. That ACC team headed over to Orlando to play Alabama. I think this is going to be a hungry Alabama defense. But thank you guys for joining the show today. Thanks for giving some love in the comments section. Appreciate anybody that shares the show, and I will remind you to share the show. We'll be back on tomorrow. Same time, same place. 1 o'clock. We got a ton of good stuff lined up. We're going to continue to bring in good guests. and we're going to continue to bring the latest and greatest of Alabama football and all of Alabama sports. So hope you guys will continue to join us. We're on the SEC Country Alabama Facebook page. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Instagram. You guys all have a good Tuesday, and Roll Tide.
You've been watching Roll Tide Daily, the new daily program for Crimson Tide fans, presented by SEC Country.